Welcome to, or back to, Forgotten Hollywood, the channel where I take you back in time to show you the movies, shows, and actors that have faded over the years. So I'm back on this couch because my little co-host really wanted to be part of the movie, but he fell asleep again, waiting, because I generally record at night. But he wanted to be part of this. He wanted to be with Mama. And he's all dressed up for it. Anyway, but since he fell asleep over here, I have decided to stay over here and help him sleep. The Little Mermaid has finally been released, and I was sitting in the very center of the theater for the very first showing available. Now, I have seen long movies. I have watched Titanic, Lord of the Rings, The Ten Commandments, and Liz Taylor's Cleopatra. This movie was shorter than all of those, but it felt long. Okay, not as long as Cleopatra, but I still found myself checking the clock several times. Here's why that's a problem. The best made movies should pull you into the story in such a way that you are swept away with the characters, and the passage of time is not noticed. This has happened to me many times, but when something is off in the pacing or plot, it can make time slow down, often to a painful pace. I have been convinced that some of the recent Disney movies would never end. Well, this one was not as bad as Peter Pan and Wendy or that live-action version of Lady and the Tramp. There was definitely pacing and plot issues in The Little Mermaid. Just so you know, I will try to avoid spoilers for the first half of my video to give an honest review to those who want to see it, and I'll let you know when I'm going to switch to giving details. Pacing is the speed in which a story is told. I often hear people complaining about older films being slow, but if you watch my videos on the Rings of Power, you know this is a huge problem with modern films as well. Back in the day, pacing might slow down from long scenic shots or even people just talking slower. However, I have a theory that much of this slowness of old films has less to do with the pacing and more to do with the filming, since shots were longer and didn't cut to different angles as much as modern movies do. Mostly because film was expensive and they didn't have digital cameras. The more modern issue is to try to do too much. When you are trying to do an in-depth look at multiple characters, you have to jump around and spend time with each one, which slows down the overall story. Not a problem if you're writing a novel, where you can devote a full chapter to every single character, but not so good on screen. The 1989 animated version was about Ariel, with other characters coming in and out of her story, and only a couple of short scenes showing background information that would become relevant shortly after. The one exception being Sebastian's conflict with the French chef, which was clearly just added for humor, though Ariel was part of the conclusion of that situation. This story centered around 4 or 5 characters, with several others playing important roles, depending on which story you were looking at. Can this sort of narrative be done in film? Yes, but it has to be done right. If you are going to cover multiple characters, it is very important to condense information. Unfortunately, condensing is not something modern screenwriters like to do. Instead, they prefer to spell everything out and let the characters develop naturally over time. This approach is fine with 1, maybe 2 characters, not 4, and definitely not 5. You inevitably run into plot holes or storylines that lead to nowhere. As far as casting and acting went, I personally didn't see too many problems. I was expecting Ariel's sisters to take a larger role, as I had read that they would, but they had about as much screen time as the original, maybe 1 short scene more, and that was only a few of them. King Triton and Queen Selena were okay as the concerned parents of their respective children, and Sebastian had some amusing moments. The star, of course, was Halle Bailey, who shined in both singing and acting. One thing I want to point out was her ability to act silently. Being expressive without saying anything is almost a lost art form. Yes, they did allow the audience to hear her thoughts a few times, but I didn't feel like that was needed. She's a good enough actress to portray what she's thinking and feeling with a look, gesture, or posture. That really came through in the scenes where she couldn't speak. She wasn't my favorite character, however. That, surprisingly, was Grimsby. In the original, he was more of a stuffy old man, but here, well, I don't want to give anything away, but he was relatable and likable character. My husband commented that he spoke for the audience, which I think is a good way to put it. It helps that he got more screen time than the original Grimsby, and served almost the same role for Eric as Sebastian did for Ariel. I don't want to say more, but a shout out to Art Malik, great job. One thing I didn't understand, well, really two things, related to the CGI characters. The only sea creatures that talked were Sebastian, Flounder, and Scuttle. This made scenes like the song Under the Sea a little bit awkward, as Sebastian is singing about this underwater band, and all you're seeing is turtles bobbing their heads as Ariel rides one of them across the ocean floor. Where's the carp playing the harp? The blackfish singing? The fluke that's the Duke of Soul? I guess we'll just have to take his word for it. The other thing was a carryover from the original when the sea creatures paint humans as being evil for eating fish, but then Scuttle eats fish on screen. So why is this the mark of evil? I don't know. Speaking of CGI, I'm sure most of you saw the character designs. I think for me, Sebastian was the most off-putting, as he had only one facial expression and the voice actor kept the same tone through most of the movie, making his character somewhat flat. Scuttle threw me off as well, but mostly because the film is set in the Caribbean, which I actually thought was a good choice due to the number of tropical fish that live there. However, rather than choose one of the many native birds, the filmmakers went with the northern gannet. The key word in that is northern, as the species lives mostly in Europe and as far north as Iceland. They do migrate pretty far south to Florida. I'm guessing they just liked the look of the bird and hoped no one would notice that Scuttle seems to have flown way off track during migration. The last thing I want to touch on before I get to spoilers is imagery. Much of the film features a very colorful Caribbean village. It is bright and fun, the music cheerful. While the island is never named, it makes it clear what part of the world we are in. Good job on that. However, the underwater scenes can be a bit murky, and the climax is so dark I had trouble even seeing what was happening. Yet another annoying modern trend seen in movies like The Batman. I love when a director knows how to utilize shadows, but the whole scene can't be a shadow. The audience likes to know what's happening. It was particularly disappointing here because I had been interested in seeing how they handled giant Ursula. Unfortunately for me, they went the way of Cloverfield, and I didn't get a good look at the monster until the end when they're dying. Also, to reiterate what I said in my other video about Disney remakes, I would not classify this as a kids' movie, as some of the imagery, especially when it came to Ursula's lair, was disturbing. More on that later. Okay, now for the spoilers. Stop here if you don't want to hear them. The biggest problem that I had was with Prince Eric. It seems like they really wanted him to take the same role as Ariel in the first movie. An interesting choice since we already had Ariel for that. He is rebellious against his mother, travels around collecting things, which he keeps in an out-of-the-way room in his palace, and he can't understand how the ocean can be evil, as his mother believes. They also make a big deal about how he was found after a shipwreck, he wasn't born to be royalty, and the sea was calling him. On top of that, when Ariel mentioned his name to Triton, he sounded shocked. I was waiting for the revelation that Eric came from the sea, or that the shipwreck was somehow connected to the death of Ariel's mother, or something like that. What was the secret to Eric's past? Don't know. They set up a mystery and then just kind of forgot about it. So much opportunity wasted. But that's the problem when you try to cover too many characters in a single movie. There's a reason the Avengers were mostly introduced in their own movies before all coming together. Another major change from the first movie was the relationship between Ursula and Ariel. In this version, the Sea Witch and the Sea King are siblings, so she introduces herself as Aunt Ursula. The character is also more developed, especially since her eels don't talk, so she gets all the lines they said in the original. However, I feel I must give credit to the remake for one detail straight out of Hans Christian Andersen. In the source material, the Sea Witch lives in a house made of the bones of drowned sailors, and Ariel sees the remains of a mermaid strangled in her garden on the way in. While she does see the remains of a mermaid, or merman, before reaching the garden, Ursula's home is practically decorated with skulls and bones. However, it is implied that these are not the drowned sailors, but her victims. In this one, her garden is not the poor unfortunate souls that couldn't pay their price. They are just violent creatures. Those who can't pay the price, it seems, are killed. This, by the way, includes Triton when he takes Ariel's place. He was shocked by Ursula's eels until he burns to death. Did I mention this is not a kids' movie? As far as plot issues go, I will focus on two of the most jarring things. The first is how Ariel found out Eric was going to marry someone else. In the original, Scuttle flies into a room, and though he meanders a bit, he takes maybe 20 or 30 seconds for him to relay the necessary information. But this Scuttle is voiced by Awkwafina, who knows how to rap. And even though rap music doesn't fit into the time, place, or tone of the film, she sings about what she heard for a full 2 minutes. Now, it doesn't take the whole time for the others to figure out the message, so Ariel gets dressed while Sebastian starts to sing and dance along with Scuttle. My favorite part of the whole song was when Ariel had enough and threw a blanket over them both to shut them up. I literally thanked her out loud. The other issue was towards the end of the movie during the climax that I could hardly make out. In the original, Ursula was focused on Ariel, the one who made her kill her eels. She was furious at her. In this one, that's still the case, but for some reason Ursula fixates on Eric, as he helplessly clings to a piece of shipwreck caught up in her whirlpool. It's Ariel, with no prior knowledge of how to steer a ship, other than watching Eric during the storm earlier in the movie, who crawls across the deck of the damaged ship and somehow pulls her up to the wheel, as she has no legs to stand on, and she is the one who steers the wreck into the monster Ursula had become. How? Just lucky, I guess? So, Ariel saves Eric twice, and he was there. She even said as much to her father when he came back to life for reasons not explained, as none of Ursula's other victims seemed to recover upon her death. There are just so many loose ends. In summary, the new Little Mermaid isn't bad, but it lacks the magical charm of the original. It's like they tried to go too real. I mean, do you want reality or talking fish? You can't really do both. As a standard fantasy film, it is alright. Would I watch it again? Not likely, but that's me. I don't like the disturbing imagery, and I could do without the rap song. But the movie did have its moments. Thanks for watching. What's your take on the new Little Mermaid? Have you seen it? Plan to see it? Or did you give it a hard pass? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the bell for notifications, and I will catch up with you next time.